All right, gang. So today we're getting into our first actual class day. Doing stuff. We got a couple of folks out, so we'll try and record stuff. Hello, folks who are out. I hope you're okay. We'll see you soon. So to kind of hopefully keep this class interesting and not land too hard on any particular piece, we're going to actually launch kind of a three-pronged attack today. Basically corresponding to the three different overarching, 40,000 foot elevation categories of stuff that we're talking through all semester long and practicing. So the first is kind of like the mindset. Why is wilderness management a little bit different than just like regular forest resources, park management, anything like that? So in order to really jump into the deep end and start swimming, I posted links to an old book called On Walden Pond by Henry David Thoreau, a guy from the kind of mid-1800s time frame. And his book and some public discussions that it started ended up about 100 years later kicking off this whole process of wilderness designation, wilderness management here in the United States first, and then the idea kind of exploded all around the world in terms of forest resource management. So it's not a textbook. The language is a little bit archaic. Like, this guy was dead and completely decayed before texting language and emoji were a thing. So it might read a little bit weird in that sense, but it's not hard. It's just trying an experiment and seeing what happens by basically throwing a pack on one day, walking out of the town that he lived in, and just living solo in the woods, essentially doing primitive living type skills. So for anybody who's interested in primitive living and survivalism and backcountry architecture and stuff like that, he kind of did that before YouTubers doing this sort of stuff for profit were a thing. So we did that for a while, a period of months, and then came back and just kind of started up this conversation. And we're not going to read that whole book. We're just going to read little chunks out of it. But take a look at chapter 1. We'll discuss this a little bit on Monday when we come back. All right, so you don't have to do like a book report or anything. Just kind of read through it and sleep on it. It's a little different. We'll check that out. The second big content area we're looking at is kind of the modern day stuff of what's our current context. What resources are we dealing with in specific in wilderness management, like physical resources, human resources, cultural, etc. And today we'll tackle climate change a little bit. I don't think that's going to be any huge surprises for folks. Like, things are super weird with the climate right now and getting weirder. And we'll rotate through other kind of classes or chunks or types of resources as well throughout the semester. And then our third thing to get started today, so that we're not just kind of reading stuff, talking about stuff, but we're actually doing things. We got the first lab exercise, which will be spending probably the second half of class introducing. And then there's a bunch of detailed instructions and stuff on the website, on the course website, of how to do this assignment. You can use Thompson Woods like we'll be talking in here in a bit, or you can use some other place, whatever's interesting. And that'll kick off our kind of doing stuff with our hands while we're doing stuff with our minds as well. All right, so 3 big content areas, and this is the stuff. We're not going to talk much about Walden Pond today. Just take a look at that. Since this stuff was written in the 1800s, it's not on copyright. It's not a textbook. You can just download the PDF of the whole thing. There are like plain versions, formatted versions, annotated versions if you'd like somebody to do like the cliff notes for you around the edges. Whatever. It's all the same book, and it's all free. So I got some links to those for you so you don't have to chase them down. Let's talk a little bit about climate change and what's going on with the climate. We have a couple of key things to chat about with this. So kind of help me understand where you guys are coming from with how familiar you are with climate dynamics and how things are changing rapidly. Like, what kind of stuff are you talking about in your other classes so that I'm not just kind of duplicating things that you've already had to suffer through elsewhere?
just like rising temperatures, rising sea levels, more extreme weather events is pretty much like the general I think standing that we build off of in other classes. I haven't really been in another class that like dives deeper into those things though. It's just
Well,
kind
that's
of like
terrifying.
this is what we're working with and like this is why it's impacting like what this class in particular.
Yeah. All right. So you said temperature, sea level, and
More extreme weather events.
extreme weather. Yeah. Extreme weather to include things like pyrocumulus clouds from ash columns or smoke columns off of wildfires that are intensified or happening for the first time in some places, for the first time in a very, very long time, like north of the Arctic Circle. We've had some like visible from space scale fires up in the Russian tundra, up in the Arctic and Canadian tundra, and then even just a couple of years ago, the Scandinavian country, Norway, Finland, Sweden, their top sections are above that Arctic Circle line as well. And they've had just catastrophic fires. But they're way off at the top end of the earth, so they don't necessarily get a lot of news coverage. But if you're thinking about going into wildland fire management and stuff like that, fire seasons now, it's not at all uncommon these days to have thousands of wildland firefighters deploying up to Alaska to fight fires in an area where we didn't really kind of think about that much or deal with that much. So the big thing with trying to understand climate change and then applying what we understand about climate change into wilderness management as just something to be aware of, as a bit of a context or something that influences the resources you're trying to protect as a wilderness manager, is that climate change is temperature change. It gets, on average, a little bit hotter everywhere. But what that actually means is a lot hotter in some places, a little bit hotter in a lot of places, and a little bit cooler in some places temporarily. Okay? Sea level rise, that isn't an isolated thing. Sea level is rising because of this. How? How is rising temperature driving sea level change?
Melting ice.
Yeah. So as you melt the Arctic and Antarctic ice caps, you have a lot more water going into the system. Not like a river here and a river there, but like extra cubic miles of water per day going into the ocean and slowly filling up. So we get like 0.2 of a millimeter rise. The rate is different at different places around the world in terms of sort of creeping up on the shoreline because there are currents. We are constantly sort of slowly sloshing the ocean basins with tides and currents. So it's not the same everywhere, but in places like coastal Florida, which is close enough to home for our purposes, it's something like 0.2 of a millimeter per year. So that's pretty fast. If you think about how many, billions or trillions of cubic miles of ocean water there are, and how much you'd have to add to even raise that on average by 0.2 of a millimeter, you could simplify that to say 0.2 of a millimeter all the way around the globe. It's a lot of extra water. And the way this works is that it's a self-reinforcing cycle. So as we start melting the ice shelves off of Antarctica, and those big icebergs start calving off of the glaciers faster and earlier each spring, each Antarctic spring, that water isn't just going into the ocean and leaving the Antarctic cryo system, the frozen system there. It's actually lubricating the glacier sliding out into the ocean and speeding it up. So glaciers melt a lot faster when you've got non-frozen seawater in contact with it. So you get the river underneath. It's like, you guys all know how slippery wet ice is, right? Imagine that at an Antarctic continent scale. So, this is not just a process, it's a changing process. It's accelerating itself as it goes. And this accelerates this. Sea level change accelerates temperature change, and so on and so forth. Same thing is true with extreme weather events, including fire. So, we get out of these tipping points. So in these processes, if you're graphing out average annual temperature anomaly, which is a 10-cent word way of saying how much is it a little bit warmer than last year, averaging out the entire surface of the Earth, averaging out that 365.25 days per year. And it's not steady. Accelerating systems look like this. Yeah. These are interrelated, so what can happen is one exacerbation, one intensification within extreme weather. Ash plumes coming off of wildfires across the northern, say, northern 30 degrees of latitude. So Arctic Circle on up. What the fire does, wildfire, because it's just a little bit warmer, maybe just a little bit drier, as rain patterns, precip patterns shift. We're actually supposed to get a little bit more rain in the next 50 to 100 years for the next couple hundred years per year here in the Midwest. In other places, it's getting a little bit drier. We get a little bit less water in terms of precip, dry out the forests, maybe get some bark beetles, get a bunch more fuel. Fire generates ash, smoke, well, smoke, which is made of ash. The ash gets blown by the weather systems created by the fire and those that have created the fire. That ash settles down, rains down, just like after the big Yellowstone caldera explosion, across a whole bunch of ice fields. Because let's say we have some of the biggest, most problematic northern fires were in Siberia. There's big frozen tundra and taiga. So tundra is like cryo grassland, taiga is like cryo forest. Those fires were so big, and it was high enough latitude, close enough to the North Pole, the Arctic Circle, all that stuff, that the wind carrying that smoke, which was loaded with ash, carried it all the way across Alaska, all the way across Canada, which is really long, and then all the way back around. Same thing happened in Australia in the southern hemisphere. Those Australian wildfires a couple years back were nuts. And all of the ice, which is, if you've ever seen photos of our planet from space, all that ice is really white. It has a high albedo or reflectance. When we have nice cold winters, get a lot of snow on the ground, we're reflecting a lot of solar radiation. Normally at our latitude around 1,300 watts per square meter, right? So 1.3 kilowatts per square meter during the day here in the summer. A lot of that light energy is getting reflected right back out. But put a bunch of ash on top of that, and now it's not reflecting, it's actively absorbing that heat and melting the ice below it. That dries out the system because that flowing water goes away, infiltrates, flows out over land, whatever. And then we get a fire there next year. Because it used to be covered in ice, but now it's not. And that is a self-reinforcing cycle. Fire prime, bigger fire. Fire in a new place where we didn't have to worry about it before. Didn't have to get in smoke jumpers that far in, and so forth and so on. So this is a positive feedback cycle. A self-reinforcing cycle. Have you guys talked about this stuff at any level of detail in your other classes yet? Like, have you heard this term before and you're like, yeah, Mark, I got it? Or not so much?
Know what a positive feedback cycle is for sure.
Okay, cool. So there's like, planetary system scientists have figured out there's like 18 or 19 major systems, like global ocean current system, cryosphere cycling, the freeze thaw of the Arctic Circle, the Antarctic Circle, and stuff like that each year. 18 or 19 of these big systems that all drive themselves as continuous cycles and drive and influence each other. So when you have this in an exponentially increasing and accelerating system, so linear increase versus exponential increase, what typically happens is you get a hockey stick graph where it's fairly chill and then there's an inflection point, a tipping point, and the rate goes way up, just vertical, like a cliff. And tipping points are where, if we want to get back to the regular sort of stable, chill, biologically productive climate that humanity grew up in over the last 300,000 years, we'd have to get that cycle back down to what it used to could be like 200 years ago, 500 years ago, etc. But when you hit that tipping point, it is basically impossible to do that, at least on any human life time scale. So climate change folks are, running the numbers, building these huge models, developing detailed mechanisms of how these things all shape each other across these 18 or 19 different planetary systems. One of them is the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Current. So this is the one that kind of brushes by Greenland, comes down the United States eastern seaboard, cools us off by bringing Arctic air down, keeps the eastern seaboard nice and kind of moderate, and then, among other things, goes across kind of the equatorial Atlantic, comes up the west coast of Africa, heats up like crazy, and warms up the United Kingdom, warms up Scotland and Ireland and the Scandinavian countries. And the North Sea is a pretty cold place, but it'd be a lot colder without that current, bringing in just crazy amounts of heat energy through that water going that way. So you got North America here, you got Europe here, Western Africa down here. It's going counterclockwise in this particular part of the AMOC. What that's done in the past, since about 1950, so past 70, 75 years, is that's slowed down by about 1/6. So that changes pretty radically what it's like to live in Scotland. Scotland's actually real close to the Arctic Circle. People don't realize that. UK is actually pretty far north. So as things get weird with the AMOC, because ice is melting out of the Arctic in a new and unprecedented way, it's dumping a bunch of that cold water in at the top of that counterclockwise cycle and stopping, making it harder for the water to flow past that huge new chunk of really cold fresh water just liberated from the ice, a little bit more each year. So that leads to that system slowing down. The AMOC slowing down means a lot more fires, a lot more forest fires, wildfires in places like Western Europe. a lot more heat waves in Western Europe. And yeah, it's a bunch of French people, we don't care about them, but we're all stuck on this planet. It's not that they're stuck here with us, it's that we're stuck with them, right? So, we get this self-reinforcing system pushing us faster and faster towards very difficult or genuinely, in any human time scale, impossible to avoid tipping points. Okay?
Do they have like a projected tipping point yet, or are they still figuring everything out? Like
They have
time-wise?
figured out these tipping points,
Okay.
and they have figured out where on this graph for each of those major systems we are. The good news, for almost half of them, we're down here. The bad news, for half of them, we're up here.
Oh,
Right? And this is all public information. It's in IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. Kofi is helping work on kind of the next edition of one part of one of those reports in terms of community resilience and sustainable human presence in ecosystems. Pretty cool stuff. But this is a very slow, difficult ship to steer. And it's like we've got that knuckle tattoo with no brakes, right, on the string at the moment. So in some ways, we are making our lives very hard. We're making the lives of our descendants very, very hard and less certain. It's not all gloom and doom. We have the technology today we have for 20 or 30 years now to basically convert everybody off of internal combustion engines, to grow a lot more of our food more locally, to do a lot of things, but we haven't done it. And sometimes we get noises from politicians and corporations trying to greenwash their operations that, yes, this is really important, let's do a thing. Amazon, for example, trying to convert over to an electric fleet. Microsoft saying that for every software product, every Microsoft Surface tablet or whatever you use, that you buy, they will offset the carbon that manufacturing, that energy use generates, and they'll do that for all of eternity. They're committing themselves to becoming a net neutral, adding the carbon sinks and carbon sources from their manufacturing and from energy consumption by their software to zero. And that's great, right? We need to hit this stuff by 2035. We're not really on track, but some things are happening. It's not all gloom and doom. It is, however, extremely serious. We are running a planetary scale experiment on what our planet can take. So if you think about the forest ecosystem, the mangroves. Everybody know what mangroves are? All right. So these basically brackish forests growing at the edges of rivers, typically at the delta of a river. They trap a lot of sediment. They pull a lot of nutrients out of the water before it hits the ocean, and helps mitigate stuff like you know that dead zone, the anoxic zone in Louisiana, where and along coastal Texas, where you know, our phosphorus and nitrate washes out of our farm fields up here in Illinois or over in Wisconsin or wherever else along the Missouri River, and all gets flushed out. Mangroves function like the kidneys of the planet. So foresters, ecologists, planetary systems folks, they try to find ecosystems that are critical to slowing this roll. And it's been suggested that mangroves are the kidneys of the planet, especially along tropical rivers where they tend to grow much more vigorously. The problem is, this is another one of those potential tipping point areas. So forestry and forest management have a lot to do with how much we are on the upswing of any of these hockey stick graphs, or how much we are trying to gently or forcibly push ourselves back down, back into the range in which our planetary organs, like mangroves being the kidneys of the system that purify essentially the liquid excretion of our continents into the ocean. If you've ever had a kidney stone, you appreciate your kidneys. There's a range of nutrient inputs that those mangroves can help sink down functionally. And up above that, you can actually start poisoning things, right? And making it harder for the mangroves to do their job, which is, we call that like planetary organ failure, in a way. And again, forestry has a lot to do with this. Is anybody familiar with the Trillion Tree Project?
Heard of it before, not much more than that, but.
All right, so we're foresters. If anybody is proposing planting a trillion, that's this many trees. That's a lot of dibbling, right? The idea being that if we plant a trillion trees, then that pulls a lot of carbon, necessarily pulls a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and helps sequester a bunch of it in the soil as well as in the lignin and the cellulosic material, the biomass of those newly planted forests or plots. Well, Mr. Beast, any guys like YouTube nerds? Mr. Beast, what, crowdfunded a couple million trees planted, something like that? So, 1,000, million, billion, no! Just kidding. We got like a 1 right here from Mr. Beast. But we got a lot more YouTubers doing this stuff before we get anywhere near the right thing. And part of the problem is that folks did some studies and figured out, okay, do we even have like the space, the physical space on the surface of the earth to plant a trillion trees, or is this just like a ridiculous back of the envelope calculation and people are looking wild-eyed and insulting each other? We just need to plant some trees, guys. And yes, there is absolutely space. There's space for more than a trillion trees. If you look back at historic reconstructions of forest habitat coverage across the surface of the earth, we've gnawed away a whole bunch of that over time, right? You know, logging in the Amazon and stuff like that nibbles away at the edges of these places. But we could replant those areas, and then we could also plant some places maybe newly exposed by retreating ice sheets. Maybe plant a whole bunch of trees in a green wall around the Sahara's expansion. Sahara is rapidly growing in size, and that is mostly a biologically dead system, right? So you plant a bunch of trees as, among other things, a windbreak, and you sink a little bit of carbon, you slow down or stop the expansion of the Sahara through that windbreak, and things are a little bit more survivable, a little bit closer to what they used to be like when things were easier. But the problem is, we can't get something for nothing. We got to figure out how to actually do this, and people have adapted, military drone technology to basically drop carpet bomb pucks of tree seeds and fertilizer packaged around seed into recently cut over or burned areas to mass seed, and you can plant, tens of thousands of trees a day using, quad or octocopter drones, just boom, 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 dropping them one after another, World War II carpet bomb style. But the problem is, trees are dark in terms of color, in terms of their albedo. So a lot of the space that's necessary for planting these trees, or we think is necessary for planting these trees, is in places that used to be bright white, covered in ice, and now they're not anymore. So we could actually make the problem worse doing this wrong. So part of the problem of managing climate as a forester is looking for and figuring out and getting in front of those unintended consequences. Say we do a bunch of crowdfunding. We get a bunch of people liking and subscribing and slapping that bell like a bag of boxed wine, and we get a whole bunch of trees paid for. We actually make the problem worse by darkening those light-colored taiga, tundra areas generally covered by snow, now covered in dark-colored trees, and keep the drying out and the wildfires and so forth continuing. Make sense? All right. Relevant to forestry, one of our 19 tipping points, or one of our 19 global processing cycles for producing about 1 in 5 breaths of the oxygen that you breathe, is the Amazon. And since we were little kids, since I was a little kid watching Captain Planet on Saturday mornings, he's our hero, gonna take pollution down to 0. Right? I am Captain Planet. Green mullet? No? No. We're gonna have to do some cultural education too, I can see. All right, so the Amazon has been under extreme pressure for, especially lately. The current president, Jair Bolsonaro, down there is, Brazil is one of the largest beef exporters in the world, right up there with the United States. And in order to do that, they got to cut down ultrasol-based Amazon rainforest, farm it out for a couple of years, slash and burn, put minimal nutrients back into the ground, farm it for a couple of years until the nutrient level can't support agriculture, run beef through there, sell it, ship it all over the world so we can get cheaper Big Macs. And then the soil collapses completely in terms of nutrient carrying capacity and turns into what's called ferrocrete. It's a natural form of concrete that you can't do anything with. So you just mow into the next section of the Amazon to do it. So the Amazon's tipping point in terms of collapsing from a huge rainforest that provides 1 out of our 5 breaths of oxygen is between 22 and 25% deforestation. So the Amazon's really big. To get to 22 to 25% deforestation, if we hit that point, it'll grasslandify. It'll turn into savanna, and then eventually into full-on grassland, basically the tropical version of prairie. And if that happens, man, every species on the planet pretty boned. We are real close to that. We are right up against the starting range of irreversible collapse for the Amazon into woodland and then grassland. Like, we're right there, as of a couple of years ago. And when you hear statistics like X number of football fields per second getting chained, where they put big ship chains around a stand and then drag the chain through, they don't even cut stuff down, they just drag it, and it just scrapes everything clean. That's the consequence of those statistics that are hard to comprehend, like 3 football fields a second, 10 football fields a second, whatever the actual number is at the moment, it keeps changing. It has consequence, it adds up. And to reverse this, to replant it, to bring that interior, mature Amazon ecosystem back is A, very close to impossible, and B, getting a lot of activists killed, a lot of foresters killed, because there's a lot of money in beef. There's a lot of money in farming that land instead of letting it be a productive non-timber ecosystem service provider in terms of air, clean water. Okay, so we as foresters, we as wilderness managers, we want to think about the Amazon as, among other things, a huge wilderness with a whole bunch of Aboriginal peoples still living in it, some of them completely uncontacted, no big deal. Foresters, we interface with this stuff at a meaningful level when we're interfacing with wilderness. Okay? So, the big sermon notes are that the systems are real and interacting and responsive to changes that we make as a species. We are the global super predator, and we are remodeling the face of the planet as we go, and that we as foresters are meaningfully hooked into most of those 19 planetary systems that basically support all life on Earth. They are collectively the life support system that we rely on and we've been taken for granted. Okay? Cool. There's a lot of examples, a lot of short video clips and stuff like that. You can take a look at the course website if you would like to know a little bit more about those. We're not going to have a quiz on it or anything, but just for your own awareness as a planetary citizen. We'll take a look. Let's head outside and just introduce our first field skill. Trail slope alignment angle as part 1 of our sustainable trails section, so that our wilderness areas are not putting stress through recreation on the functional ecosystems that are keeping us alive. All right, so we'll head out the back door to forestry, and for those of you listening to the recording, we're going to head out to check out Thompson Woods from the near side of the forestry department. All right, somebody keep me honest on when we hit 150. Sound good? I don't want to keep it too long. So, we're working on something called trail slope alignment. There are a lot of specific techniques that you have to use in the field when you are designing, building, maintaining, or sunsetting trail networks outside of wilderness, or especially inside of wilderness, where the amount of labor relative to the amount of trail that you're building is much higher. So, trail slope alignment is one of our silver bullet kinds of things. Part of my dissertation research was to help develop this technique for the Forest Service and the Park Service, and we won't necessarily see it in like trail building manuals for the Forest Service and stuff like that yet. We're still working on that stuff. It takes a long time to get things into government, just handbooks and manuals. So if you're working on a trail crew this coming summer and you don't see this, that's okay. It just hasn't hit that particular manual yet. All right, so the basic idea with trail slope alignment is everywhere that is not mathematically perfectly flat on the surface of the earth is going to drain water in some direction. And that's fine. Let's see here. Because soil is vulnerable to transport and erosion and stuff like that, and deposition. We call those muddy spots deposition. And gullies are where the soil is getting transported away from. Anywhere that's not flat, on a micro scale or on a macro scale, all of Thompson Woods is like 1 pixel on a way zoomed out map. We gotta understand that a trail, as a wilderness facility, is removing on purpose a lot of the vegetative cover, a lot of the root mass that is holding these soil particles in place. it is changing the composition, the texture. For those of you who've taken soils already, you know the texture is the fraction of coarse fragments, sand-sized particles down to about 2 millimeters in diameter, silt particles, and clay particles, smallest of all. We're changing that texture on purpose, amending the soil if we need to add some sand, or add some coarse fragments from nearby, or armor it up with a punching bridge. So a backwoods bridge you make out of a single split 16-foot section of trunk, and butterfly it open, lay it flat, and people walk on that instead of walking on the soil. Lots of different things we can do to try to protect soil. Trail slope alignment, as it turns out, is more effective and cheaper and easier, but you just have to sort of plan for it than almost any other trail management technique used in the wilderness context. Okay, so what is trail slope alignment? The basic idea is you want the compass direction, the azimuth, or the facing, where the, not where the north arrow is pointing, but where a compass is pointing forward along the trail as you're walking or riding along it, versus the angle that the hill slope is opening out onto. So if you are facing straight downhill, that is the landform aspect, LFA. That's some number between 0 and 360. And then if the trail is going through that particular spot, you're looking straight out down slope or straight up slope, mathematically the same thing. You just add or subtract 180 on the compass to look down slope or up slope. It's going to be a second separate, independent direction, compass reading, facing, for what direction the trail is going. And that also has a 180 back azimuth. So let's say the slope right here, everybody, if you were standing kind of right at the edge of this grass to forest forb transition, point in the direction of down slope from right there. So if you are standing right here, where's down slope from here? Yeah, back towards you guys, right? Awesome. That's the landform aspect, and that's some number, right? So if you've got either of the compass clinos, let's just roughly within plus or minus 15 degrees, let's estimate what that direction is. Okay? And we did this also in summer camp, so if you're getting deja vu, you're not crazy.
I'm trying to remember what
Would it be
It's
like,
okay, I'll
state
walk
we
you
were
through
in
it.
whenever we were
do you
doing
want
that.
like the south 70 something degrees west, or do you want just like the 260-ish?
We want the number. 260-ish. Let's call it 260.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right?
270 maybe.
Okay.
Is it okay, like, doing it this way?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
We can basically see where we're going. So if a raindrop hits from that spot, and with dry, cracked soil like this, it's going to flow over land. It's going to flow directly along the number that you picked, ish. You know, within plus or minus 10, 15 degrees, whatever. We do it with more precision in real life, but for just explanation, there you go. Now, let's say you got that 260, and we're running the trail to this rock right here, from this point to there, and it goes straight back the opposite direction, and it curves elsewhere. But at this moment, at this instantaneous spot along your travel at the trail, it's going straight towards this field stone and straight back from it. So, compass folks, what number corresponds to this point straight towards that rock? All right, 210. Olivia, somewhere around the same? 180? Okay. Yeah, so from that spot to the rock, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so 210. Cool, so we got 260 and 210. So trail slope alignment angle is going to be the angle between that trail 210 and that slope. 260, 270, yeah. So that's going to be about how many degrees? Subtract the smaller one from the bigger one.
50.
50, 60 degrees, something like that. That's it. That's the whole thing. And based on walking thousands of miles of trails and doing these measurements and figuring out where is it super eroded and messed up and expensive and damaging the ecosystem down slope and down trail versus where is it sustainable and looking good and we're have to spend basically zero to keep this trail open and maintained and safe. Anything that is 75 degrees to 90 degrees is going to be pretty autopilot. You've got to spend about zero effort on it. Keep it maintained, keep it open, keep it safe. We can have these double as fire lines in an emergency situation. These are good quarters for search and rescue. Awesome. Anything smaller than 75 degrees all the way down to 0 degrees where the trail is running straight down or straight up the slope, not sustainable. Even if it's not very steep. This is a change from previously how foresters used to design and build trails. Trail slope alignment is the bigger of the direction the trail's going or the direction the slope is running minus the smaller of those two. And if you need to use the back azimuth of either one to get it in that 0 to 90 range, then you add or subtract 180 degrees from whichever you need to. Okay? So that's the basic idea of it. We got detailed instructions on our course website. Let's have this one, see if we can tackle it in kind of the next 2 weeks. We've got a couple of students out today. We'll get everybody kind of on the same page coming up. This is not a super long exercise. Start to finish, it's maybe like an hour, something less. This is pit country, so be careful, right? This is a live fire exercise in terms of safety hazard. So be careful, have your head on the swivel, have a tick management plan, you know, closed-toed shoes, long pants, chemicals to repel, or whatever you need, alright? And we'll take kind of the next week or two to work through that assignment at your own pace. If you don't have a compass in your own sort of professional stable of tools, you can use an app on your phone to get pretty darn close. Great. Alright? Or you're welcome to borrow some survey grade stuff. As long as you return, we're good to go. Alright?
You're saying steepness doesn't matter as much as far as erosion goes. It's not just like, it's more like the steepness times the length effect grade
Yeah.
that the trail's along.
So, even if you are running a trail along a cliff, which is like undefined, there is no run, it's all rise. Let's be like infinity percent slope. If you're running the trail parallel to that cliff line, it's actually flat. So if you're running, the trail slope alignment is 90 degrees, perfectly sustainable, perfectly flat, iso-elevational, when you're walking along the contour line on the map. That's how that number is defined in terms of topography. So it is always exactly 90 when you're standing in the stream bed looking down the stream bed, or walking down the stream bed. So yeah, the landform slope doesn't matter. In fact, we'll talk later in a future class session about how you actually want a lot of slope sideways to the trail. You don't want the trail to be super steep. You want the landform to be super steep so you can control traffic and keep it on that flat spot. Everywhere else, kind of dangerous, but really pretty. So, there you go. Alright, that's it for today.
Thanks.
Take a look at the course website. We got all that stuff for you. All that. Thank you, man. Be safe.
See ya.
Have a good day.
Do you have help carrying anything?
No, I'm just going to the office. Yeah. Cool, thanks. Hey guys.
Hey.